festival of Pesach.
No bread.
Correct. And we are going to be spending the next 2 weeks learning some halachot related to Leil HaSeder.
So is next week the last week?
Oh no, don't say that. It's too sad. I can't talk about that, Ezra. I can't answer that.
What happened?
It's too painful. Ezra asked a very painful question.
What was the question?
You wouldn't be saying that if you was here last year during COVID, man.
He was asking if this was the last lesson before. We have one this week and next week, and then I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen. Okay, sweet, wonderful people. What I want to talk about today is I want to talk about a part of the Leil HaSeder right at very, very early on in the Leil HaSeder. We start Leil HaSeder, correct? We start Leil HaSeder with Kiddush, like we begin many, really that's how we begin a festive meal. Like on Shabbat and on Yom Tov, we start with Kiddush, Kadesh, and then afterwards, there are two things. Urchatz, we wash our hands in order to eat a vegetable. Urchatz, wash hands. Karpas is what is the vegetable that we eat. And what I want to spend a few minutes today talking about is three things. The first thing is I want to talk about what are we supposed to do? Technically, what do we eat? The Karpas part. Then the second thing I want to do is I want to look at the source for this part of the Leil HaSeder, Karpas. We'll talk also, and this is what David was talking about a minute ago, where does the word Karpas come from? The Gemara doesn't use the word Karpas. We'll see that it's later than the Gemara. And then finally, we'll look at some insights into the significance of the Karpas. How does it fit into the Leil HaSeder? So we're going to start, really the best way is just to understand what it is. So to understand what Karpas is, on source number 1, we have a fantastic book that I might tell you all is available for free online. Penine, yes, it's over here.
I don't mean to burst your bubble, Rob. We're literally learning this in one shiur. This exact book.
Oh, excellent,
Yes.
Excellent. Penine Halacha. There are many volumes, but over here he's talking in the laws of festivals on Seder night. He describes very briefly what Karpas is. Would somebody like to read the first source to tell us what Karpas is? Who just said that?
I did.
Oh, sure. Off you go.
From number 1. Right?
Yes, absolutely. Go on.
The sages ordained eating a vegetable dipped in liquid between Kiddush and the recitation of the Haggadah in order to change routine. All year long, we eat vegetables during the meal, after washing hands over bread. But at the Seder, we eat a bit of vegetable before reciting the Haggadah and before washing our hands for the meal. Two things are unusual about this. First, we eat a vegetable before the meal, and second, we wash our hands twice instead of once. In addition, because we eat a vegetable before reciting the Haggadah, our Seder meal is imbued with an added importance, because the finest banquets generally begin with appetizers and hors d'oeuvres, followed by a pause for a different part of the program, after which the main meal begins. There are differing opinions about what Karpas is. Some say it is celery, and this is the widespread custom amongst Sephardim. Others say it is parsley, which is the custom of some Ashkenazim. Most Ashkenazim, however, use neither celery nor parsley, because according to Ashkenazic custom, there is uncertainty about what blessing to recite over them. They instead use boiled potatoes. Each family should continue its own tradition.
Excellent. Okay.
Would you not argue that tradition of potatoes just came from the fact that potatoes were especially cheap where Ashkenazim were living?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Well,
Yes. It's a vegetable. We'll discuss. Yeah, there are lots of different minhagim about what people use. Does anyone here not use celery or parsley or potato? Do you use something else?
Yeah, banana.
You do a banana.
Banana, wow. That is the first time I've heard that.
Do you, Ezra? That's very interesting. You're the second person I've heard of who uses a banana for Karpas.
Really? Who's the first?
He uses a banana.
We had a guest once at our Seder who uses a banana, and the reason why they use a banana is
Because they didn't make sure that the people know that the bracha on a banana is Adamah.
exactly.
Really?
That's brilliant.
Does he
Ezra,
by any chance know Rabbi Shmuel Fried then?
I'll have to find out. I will find out.
My family got it from him, and the reason why he does is because everyone in yeshiva needs to make sure that banana is adama. So to make sure they know it's adama, they use it for karpas.
Excellent. That is excellent. A
And
very
that's
good
what
way that
yeshiva,
everyone will
I
know.
did live with him in Dallas when I was there for a little bit.
Fascinating.
That's my family.
That's very, very interesting. Anything else? So we've got celery, potatoes, parsley, bananas. Anything else? Anyone else use anything other than these vegetables?
So what other? My mother uses cilantro.
Does it
Because
have
she
to
hates parsley.
Oh, that's
Does it
that's
does it
interesting.
have to be a vegetable or can it be
Yes, but she really
A
hates
vegetable. A vegetable.
bananas?
That
not a
much?
vegetable?
No, it has to be something on which you make the bracha borei pri ha'adama.
So you could use watermelon. You could.
You could use a watermelon, yeah.
Yeah.
The reason why the bracha is borei pri ha'adama, it's a bit complicated, this, and I mean it's slightly complicated, but there is a debate about whether you need to make multiple brachot during Leil HaSeder. For example, on your wine, you make a bracha borei pri hagafen on the first cup of wine. And the Ashkenazi custom is to make a bracha on every cup of wine separately.
It is?
Borei pri hagafen 4 times, each time on each of the cups. Now the question is concerning the karpas. When I make that borei pri ha'adama on the karpas, as opposed to the wine, because the wine, the Haggadah breaks it, and I need to make a new blessing on the wine for each cup. I will have more vegetables later on in the meal. Do you know which vegetable we have afterwards?
Maror.
We have the maror, exactly, the maror. And the bracha that I make on the karpas, borei pri ha'adama, covers the maror as well. That's why it needs to be borei pri ha'adama, because there has to, according to many authorities, it has to cover the maror afterwards as well. That's very, very interesting. Thank you, Ezra, for that. Excellent. That's very basically what the custom is. So we'll just go through again. We start with Kadesh. We wash our hands in order to then eat the karpas, urchat, karpas, and then we continue with the Seder. Yachat is when you split the matzah in two, and then magid when we start telling the story, and then the meal, etc., continues afterwards. Now, washing your hands, as Rav Melamed points out over here, we wash our hands to eat this vegetable. Now, there is a debate. Obviously everybody knows that before we have bread, we wash our hands because our hands may be impure, and the Cohn would wash their hands before they would eat in the temple. And to remember the Cohn that washed their hands, we wash our hands. And that custom of washing hands for bread is equally relevant when we eat a fruit that's wet, because if it's wet, it can spread tumah. However, nowadays the custom is not to wash for vegetables. In fact, if any of us were to have a fruit or vegetable, we do not wash netilat yadayim to have fruit or vegetable.
We still wash our hands and say no bracha.
If you want. I mean, I could go to the farm, pick a carrot from the ground, and bite straight into it, no problem.
If it's wet.
You would go.
But we don't. But the custom nowadays is people tend not to wash their hands for vegetables, which is a discussion for another day. But on Leil HaSeder, at least the person leading the Seder, if not everybody, the person leading the Seder washes their hands before they move on to the karpas. So they go together, urchat, washing hands for the karpas. And that's what he means. On most nights in a meal, you wash your hands once for the bread. But on Leil HaSeder, you wash your hands twice. Once for karpas, and then once for the matzah, which will be later on. And what he was saying, what you also mentioned, is that it makes a meal into a little bit fancier meal. It's like an hors d'oeuvre, an appetizer. And to the end of our discussion, we're going to come back to this appetizer idea for the karpas. Of course, for many people, we spend a long time doing magid. The magid, telling the story, can take an hour and a half. So you're having an appetizer, but the meal could be 2 hours later. So it's interesting to see the karpas as an appetizer for a meal when there's such a long gap between karpas and the actual meal.
So where we could use any pri adama for Karpas if there's no tradition? Like, of course we have traditions, but
So it also has to be small. The custom is only to have a bite.
okay.
So
you
So I
can't
suppose
have
that's what's useful when people use parsley. It's a very small amount because we don't say a bracha achrona. You know that we are required when you eat, when you have a meal, you make a blessing before and you make a blessing afterwards. But if you eat less than a kazayit,
Then you don't
you make a blessing before, but you don't make a blessing after. Now we're not going to recite the blessing after the karpas. There's no blessing after the karpas. So because we're not, we want to avoid doing the blessing afterwards, so you have to make sure it's a small amount. So then smaller vegetables makes it easier to make sure
like a tomato.
you have a
Cherry
small
tomato.
amount.
If you have one single cherry tomato, you have to say birkat mazon or birkat achrona.
I would cut a cherry tomato in half, I think. Depends how big they are. Actually, I had a cherry tomato today and it was very big.
Sometimes small.
What did you have your cherry tomato
Israeli
with?
kind of nice.
Oh, excellent.
What
Yeah,
did you-
I was having lunch today. Thank you for your question, Moshe. Okay,
I love eating lunch.
excellent, good. Okay,
British people say tomato.
so this is not exactly the topic, but important. Important, but we'll talk about it another day. Thank you, Achiud. And I must say, Achiud, how lovely it is to see you here, as always. Okay, so if you have a look in this source number 2 is actually a quote from the actual Haggadah. Do you see that this comes back to what you were saying, David? You see, take a small amount of karpas, less than a kazait, in order not to recite an after blessing. Dip it in salt water, which is our custom nowadays, and make the following blessing, and that's Bora Priya Adama. Okay, so that is what to do. Any questions on what to do? Everything clear on what we do? What is karpas? Not why it's called karpas. We understand what's involved. Clear to everybody? Okay, now let's go to the source. The source of karpas can be found in the Talmud. The Talmud, Masechet Pesachim, which is really the Talmud that discusses Pesach. So we look at the Talmud, then we're going to look at the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. So the Talmud tells us like this. The Talmud, it's actually a Mishnah in the, I think it's the first perek of Masechet Pesachim. The Mishnah is going through the order of the Leil HaSeder. I've only put in our source sheet just the piece that's relevant to us. Heviu lefanav, brought before the person leading to the Seder, brought before them a vegetable. Mitabel b'chazeret, he dips it in chazeret, ad shemagia leparperet habat, and this is prior to eating the meal. Now there was at one stage a debate about what you dip the karpas in. There was even one opinion. I'm sorry. Thank you. May you all be blessed with health. Admer ve'etzrim. There was a debate about what you dip the karpas in. Our custom nowadays is salt water, but there were times that people dipped it in vinegar, and there are also times that people dipped it in charoset. But it's pretty universal, as far as I know today, that we don't dip it in any of those things. We dip it in salt water. Just to add in brackets, because this year's Seder night is on a Friday night, you need to prepare the salt water before Shabbat. It's not something you prepare on Shabbat, it's something you prepare before Shabbat.
Ralph,
Yes.
if in circumstances where Pesach takes place on what would otherwise be Yom Chol, would it be permissible to prepare it after you've already, like after sunset, after Pesach?
Yes. Yeah, it's a Shabbat prohibition. It's a Shabbat issue, which is why you prepare it beforehand.
Can you please elaborate on the issue of preparing salt water on Shabbat? Because it's not cooking, it's not this, it's not that.
Mixing.
Mixing, oh, it's a melacha mixing. Never mind. That makes
Yes,
sense.
okay. So now if we go to Rashi elaborates on the Talmud. You see, the Talmud's quite brief in describing this stage of the Leil HaSeder. Notice, by the by, people, that the word karpas does not appear in describing the ceremony or this stage of the Seder in the Talmud. The Talmud just says it's brought before them, the vegetable, he dips it, and he dips it prior to eating the meal. Rashi, on that piece of Talmud, really elaborates to explain exactly what's going on. And this is what Rashi in source number 4 is on the Gemara in source number 3. So Rashi says like this. עד שמגיע לפרפרת הפת, קודם שיגיע לאותו חזרת, שהוא אוכל אחר המצה, שהוא מברך עליה על אכילת מרור, ויטבול כדי שיכיר התינוק וישאל. So he's explaining the timing. We're saying, don't read into the Talmud to think that you dip the vegetable into chazeret. Rather, he's saying that this dipping takes place prior to that dipping that takes place after we've eaten the matzah. You follow? Now, why do we do it? Kedei sheyakir tinok v'yishal lefi she'ein regilim bnei adam le'echol yerek kodem ha'su'uda. The purpose, and this is Rashi explaining the rationale for why we do the karpas. Rashi explains the reason why we do it. It's like a circular argument. We do it in order that children should ask the question of, why are you doing this? Normally, when you have a meal, you wash, you have hamotzi, you have matzah on Leil HaSeder, other days you have bread, and then you have a meal. Here, we're having a little vegetable prior to washing on the bread, which is unusual. That break with the regular order of doing something is to whet the appetite of the children. The children will see this and wonder what's going on, and that will cause them to ask questions. Does that make sense? That's Rashi. Asher, thank you so much for this. It looks delicious. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. Oh, that is phenomenal. What is it? Oh, it's unbelievable. Thank you so much. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. Yes.
So there's sort of an irony that in Baal Tshuva families where you have where the parents are both Baalei Tshuvim, but the kids were raised religious. The gute idische Kinderlach will know will know why we're dipping the karpas in the salt water, but the parents will likely know less. So the parents will often be asking the kids questions. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And the gute idische Kinderlach will respond, we're doing this so that I will ask you why we're doing this.
So the truth is, your point is an excellent point, but I'm going to respond with something not necessarily relevant to what you were saying, as is my custom, especially with Moishela's questions. No, but Moishela, you raised something very, very, very interesting. And I know that you're not parents now, but Be'ezrat Hashem, time goes very quickly, and there's certainly something to think about as you prepare for Seder night. There are some times that the Seder night becomes a time for children to perform. Before, but that's really not what Leil HaSeder is about. Leil HaSeder is all about asking questions. You understand? And it's quite reasonable for children to ask questions that parents do not have the answer. The parents are unable to answer those particular questions. So this is just any break from order, any break from structure, just makes me more aware of what's going on. You follow? So the fact that I understand what I'm doing, it still just makes the evening different to normal. I'll give you another example. There's a family that I know of who they have, pictures on the walls of their room, wherever they do their Leil HaSeder. That's where they eat their normal Shabbat meals. They move the pictures around the walls on Leil HaSeder. Not because of any, just because now the room looks a bit different. When the room looks a bit different, I'm just a bit more awake and thinking a bit more, and it sparks me just to ask questions. You follow?
It's on that animalistic side of your brain that says something's wrong.
Let's say.
There was
you.
a pillow that was released. This photo became quite viral amongst American Jewry. There's a pillow, like a throw pillow for a couch, released by the American homewares chain Bed Bath & Beyond. They said, "Why is this?" He knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Why is this night different from all other nights? It had a picture of a menorah and said "Happy Hanukkah."
Yeah, I remember that.
That's beautiful.
And then you pull that out. You pull that out so the kids ask, "Why does it say Happy Hanukkah on this pillow?"
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you for that. Moshe, that's such an interesting story. Thank you.
Yes. So
Harsh.
just to reiterate, wash them before eating the karpas, and then dipping in salt waters to make the kids ask a lot of questions.
They're Rashi. That's what Rashi said. So Rashi is saying that the reason it's a break with the normal structure of an evening. Normally you wash and then you have a meal. Here you're washing, having a vegetable, and then postponing the meal quite a bit. So it's not. It's really a way of just I don't know what the word. It's just sort of like keeping people a little bit more awake, a little bit more alert, changing things, shaking things up a bit, in order that people's sort of inquisitive sense will be heightened. You follow? I'm just a bit more aware, a bit more observant, because things aren't as I expect them to be. You know, when life is going on a sort of an expected path, I can be on autopilot. But when things are not as I expect them to be, I'm less on autopilot, and that causes me to be more aware of what's going on. And really, Rashi is saying that's the purpose of why we do this ceremony. No, ceremony is not the right word. I'm sorry. Why we do this stage of the Leil HaSeder. Okay. Now, if we go from Rashi, we went to the Talmud, Rashi that gave a reason. If we go from there to the Tur, as you know, is over here, a Sefer Halacha, written by the son of the Rosh. Was it the 14th century? Maybe a little 13th, 14th century?
What was it?
What's his
The
name?
Tur.
Arba'ah Tur.
Baturim. He wrote.
This preceded the Shulchan Aruch.
Correct. I mean, yes, it did. We'll look at the Shulchan Aruch in a minute. The Rav Yosef Karo wrote a commentary on the Tur, which we will.
But it's less of a commentary and more of a revision.
Reorganizing.
Basically,
Well, no, he wrote two things. He wrote one thing called the Bet Yosef, which is really a digest of the halachic journey.
yeah.
And then he wrote a separate book that follows the same structure, and that's called the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, if you have a look at the Torah it says, Lokeach yirakot, you take vegetables, v'yivarech bore pri ha'adama, umetabel, and you dip it, as we know now, in salt water, kedei lasot shinui b'shvil hatinokot, like Rashi, in order to make this night different, that children should ask, kizehu shinui shetovlin kodem suda, you're dipping prior to the meal. We're doing something that we don't normally do. That's the Torah, very much based on what we saw in Rashi. Finally, if you look at Rashi, at the Shulchan Aruch writes, Notel Yadav, L'tzorech Tibul Rishon, you wash your hands, that's Uruchatz, but you don't make a blessing on that washing of the hands. V'yikach. Now look what he just said over here. Do you see that? I think this is one of the first times we see the word appear. And that is the word Karpas. V'yikach mea Karpas. Do you see that in the Shulchan Aruch? Notice the Torah does not use that word. It's around the time the Shulchan Aruch that the word Karpas became used. Pachot mikazait umat bilo b'chometz. Dip it in vinegar. Now, because you have less than a kazait, you do not make a blessing afterwards.
Why do people use salt water instead of vinegar?
So there appear to be three different customs. One custom was to dip it into the charoset. I think that was very minimal. I'm not sure who continued that. I think that's not something that people do nowadays. And then I suppose vinegar and salt water are both quite bitter.
If I'm not wrong, the Yemenite, the last time I spent, they did that.
In vinegar.
No, with that, what's the word again?
Charoset.
The charoset, yeah.
Really? Yeah. So there is.
With the chasa, with the charoset.
Yeah, there is the. That could be. It could be the Rambam might say that, and if he does, that would explain why the Yemenites follow that custom. But the majority, either in bitter salt water or in vinegar. It could just be to do with what's more available. You know,
It could be for sure.
the salt water became more available, and that's why that became the prevalent custom. Okay.
Less expenditure.
Yeah, could be. Now the word karpas is quite late on. You see, it appears in the Shulchan Aruch, I think, but I'm not 100% sure. There was a chap called the Maharil.
Yes.
Maharil, who lived at the same time as the Shulchan Aruch, and I think he was the first one to use the word karpas. And there's a big debate about where the word karpas comes from. It's obviously, as you can tell, it's not a Hebrew word. It doesn't come from Hebrew, and there's a debate about whether it's of Greek origin or if it's from a Persian origin. And I'm not a linguist to make any comment and say which one I think it might be. But there seems to be a debate about whether the word comes from a Greek, the word comes originally from a Greek or from a Persian.
You're asking about the etymology of the term?
Correct.
That was just
Okay.
Wikipedia.
Rabbi Google.
Okay. Now, what's the purpose? What function does a karpas serve? Like, why is it, at the moment, it's almost like a circular argument. Do you understand what I mean by circular argument? We're doing something in order that children should ask, why are we doing it? But the reason you can't do something in order that somebody can ask you, why are you doing that? You follow? Because eventually you're going to have to say something.
Karpas is actually a peninsula in Cyprus.
Thank you so much. Nowadays, you don't actually need to know anything. You just need a mobile phone. And with that, you can know everything. So what I want to do is I'd like to look at two explanations, two understandings of how the Karpas part of the Seder actually fits in very, very beautifully into the Seder story. The first is, we'll see it in based on a Posuk and a Rashi in Bereshit, and then we're going to conclude with a beautiful teaching from Rav Kook. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim to everybody. Okay. This is really fantastic, Asher, thank you. Okay, the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan was written, I think, at the beginning of the 20th century. About 100 years ago. It's in source number 6. Now look what he says about it. He says over here, Ala karpas anu nogim nikach batzal. He says a custom take onions or tznon. How to say this is what we nowadays in our family we have radishes or min yerek shebirchato ha'adama, and that follows what Ezra was saying, or any vegetable that upon which you make the blessing ha'adama, tapuchei adama, potatoes. For achoronim is kiru shenagu likach. Now that's petrozilia. Petrozilia is parsley. Ve'inanu yodin mahu. I guess he didn't know what petrozilia was. Ve'inyan karpas have zecher la'avodat parech. And the reason why we have it is a number of people get quoted. The Aruch HaShulchan is one of them. He says we have it in order to remember the work. Sha'avdu shishim rivo ki karpas yotiyot shishim parech. Do you see that? If you mix around the letters of karpas, you get to samach, which is 600,000 men worked befarech. You follow? So the karpas is if you rearrange the letters, instead of having karpas, you have 600,000 working very hard, and so therefore there's a hint to really that's the beginning of the Seder story, is the 600,000 people who work very hard. That's rearranging the letters. It appears in Aruch HaShulchan. This idea also appears in many other halachic writings explaining why we have the karpas. I want to look at.
Rabbi, is it connected to the 600,000 Neshama Hashem created even before this world was created?
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't that possibly. That's a very interesting connection. I don't know. Okay. Yes, Ezra. Banana Ezra.
That when Moshe was making when it came to the Karban on Pesach, not a lot of Jews were circumcised and everything and all, and Moshe didn't know how to do that. So Hashem told him, build yourself a fire and cook the Karban Pesach and everything. No, he's going to bring the smell of Gan Eden into it, and he did. And so all the Jews came out, wanted to have some, but he said that they first need to get circumcised and like purified. And the closest mikvah they had was the Nile River. So for thousands of people.
Oh, really?
It is. There, it's also to commemorate that too as well. I've heard.
Really, that's interesting. I had never heard that.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you for that, Ezra. Thank you for this drink. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borein fashor rabot chesonan al kol ma shabata la'achayot ve'em nefesh kol chai baruchei olamim. That was fantastic.
Would you have like another? I'm going to refill my own.
No, it was brilliant. It was perfect. Thank you very, very much. Okay. Now look at this. You'll never guess that the word Karpas, in a totally different context, appears in Rashi at the beginning of but one of the early stories in the Torah. If you look in source number 7, there's a story with which you are all very familiar. Look at this. Yisrael, that is Yaakov Avinu, Ahav, et Yosef. Yaakov loved his son Yosef, Mikol Banav. He loved him more than his other sons. Well, that's a lot to talk about there, but let's translate it like that for now. Why? Ki ben zekunim hu lo, because he was born to him, Yaakov, in Yaakov's old age. And therefore, asa lo, Yaakov made for Yosef, ketonet, a cloak, pasim of stripes. Right? Yeah. Now, as you all know, how did we get down to Egypt? The story of the slavery in Egypt begins really with this story. The jealousy between Yosef and his brothers led to terrible things, and it's really as a result of that story. This is the beginning of that story, the very beginning of that story. The result of that story is what brought us as a nation to Egypt. Now, Rashi, in explaining the word pasim, in modern Hebrew, as you know, the word pas is a stripe. You know when you buy cakes in the shop, they're called a pas, a line.
Yeah, okay.
So, but a stripe is a type of line,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so that's the word pas. But look what Rashi in explaining this word pasim, lashon kli melat. Come on, now look at that. Come on, karpas utchelet. Uchmo ketonet pasim de tamar va'amnon. Now look that this pasim is connected in Rashi over here. This word pasim connected to the word karpas. Now I want to tell you a terrible, terrible suggestion, and that is karpas. Obviously, as we mentioned, karpas. The word karpas only came quite late into the Seder story. It wasn't something. The Gemara doesn't use the word karpas. So this could be post facto, but it's a very, very interesting observation that when I take my vegetable and dip it in salt water, do you remember what the brothers did with the pasim, the karpas? They dipped it, exactly, they dipped in blood, and that dipping is the beginning of the story. You hear that? So when I take my vegetable, karpas, and I dip it in salt water, it's really remembering the initial karpas or pasim, ketonet pasim, that was dipped by the brothers in blood. And I hate to say a terrible thing, but that dip started the story. You follow? Okay, now...
Stuffy in here to you?
No, I'm doing fine. I just had this amazing drink, which was great. Thank you. Now, I want to tell you something very interesting, and that is, all parts of the story, we tell. We tell every part of the story. Meaning, when I want to tell the story of the Exodus, and please God, next week, we will spend a lot of time talking about the mitzvah of telling the story. That's the topic of our discussion next week. But we tell the story. But over here, with the karpas, dipping, we don't tell the story. We don't even clearly allude to it by, we take a vegetable and dip it in salt water, and we say this, if you look at Rashi, actually it turns out this symbolizes the dipping of the cloak into blood, right? But you have to know a lot of background in order to understand what's going on over here. You follow? So I read this interesting idea. It's in source number 9. We won't read it inside now. And that is that this particular message about the brothers and Yosef is not a moment in history on which we are particularly proud. You know, it's true that it's the beginning of the story, but we are sitting around a table, siblings are sitting next to each other, families are coming together. This is not a moment that we want to highlight. Yeah, we want to remember it, but we want to remember it sort of hinting. I don't want to say it because
Just like Rosh Hashanah, is that we don't want to say our sins, we want to hint.
That is exactly the idea, Ezra. I don't want to tell this story because I'm not excited. Even though Lela said it is all about telling the story, this bit of the story is not a great bit of the story. The story of how we came into Egypt, about siblings who didn't get on with each other, a family that didn't seem to be working as it should be, especially at this family moment, which is Leil HaSeder. I don't want to miss this family moment by screaming and talking about how things could go wrong. I want to look at how things are going right. And therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to take this vegetable, we're going to dip it in salt water.
That's why we dip it in salt water and in vinegar, because it's
Exactly, it's a bitter story.
Yeah.
And the people that need to understand. And the people that don't, the children will ask questions. You follow? But I don't want to say it out loud because I don't want people to think negative. I want families to stay strong. I want families to stay together. I don't want to draw attention to this part of the story. So we hint at it, but we don't say it. We don't tell this bit of the story. We just act this little bit of the story. You follow? So therefore, according to this interpretation, it's true that they are links. But they're not overt because it's too painful to say this bit out loud. You follow? Okay. That's one interpretation of the Karpas story. Is that clear to everybody? Now I might just point out in brackets 2 things. First of all, as I mentioned, the word Karpas, even though Rashi mentions the word Karpas over here, Rashi does not use the word Karpas in the Gemara over here. You follow the word Karpas to describe comes much later. There's a debate about if Karpas was the name of the vegetable that was used at that time when this, when this part of the, if there was a vegetable that was called something like Karpas, and that's why this became known as Karpas. We don't have that vegetable now. But so this idea is sweet, but I'm not sure whether it's the real reason because the word Karpas, it's all based on the word Karpas. And the word Karpas is a much later word than this Rashi over here. But it's certainly something to think about, and that link is obviously not it's not a coincidence. And it's certainly appropriate for us to contemplate at that stage that, the beginning of the story wasn't great. The brothers and Yosef were not functioning well with this when they took this and they dipped it, and our dipping is reenacting that. Okay, that's one direction based on Rashi. I want to take a second direction now, a totally different direction, and this is the direction that I read in Rav Kook. Rav Kook wrote, as you probably know, a commentary on the Sidur. His commentary on the Sidur is called Olat Ra'aya. Is it here?
Well, a Sidur built off.
Oh, exactly.
Yes.
Bidiyuk. So inside his Sidur is also the Haggadah Shel Pesach. So he has notes on various stages of the Haggadah Shel Pesach inside his book Olat Ra'aya. So on Karpas, he says something very, very interesting. And he starts by quoting the Gemara. So I'm going to read you this piece of Gemara. Gemara says like this. B'matzav tzimtzum achayim. At a time when somebody does not have a lot, tzimtzum is like they are, cutting back. Halo bar bei Rav. So it's a story about a rabbi, an Amorah called Bar bei Rav. Delo nefisha le rifta. He wasn't a wealthy man and he didn't have a lot of bread. Because he didn't have a lot of bread, lo lechel yirka. He did not eat vegetables. He didn't have a lot of vegetables. Why? Mishum de garir. Because when you eat a vegetable makes you feel more hungry for bread. So if I haven't got a lot of bread, I'm not going to eat vegetables because if I eat a vegetable before eating bread, it will make my appetite greater. And when it makes my appetite greater, I'll only want more bread. And because I haven't got a lot of bread, I'm just going to eat the bread, because even though I would think eating a vegetable before the bread would make me fuller, actually eating a vegetable before bread makes me hungrier. That's the Talmud. And then he gives another example. V'chein ba'aniyoti, when I was poor, lo achli yirka, I did not eat vegetables, mishum de garir, because a vegetable causes you to feel hungrier. Hine, we see, hayirka, a vegetable, a yerek, mosif girui umegadel et hare'avon, v'imo et regesh ha'onek hamuchashi sheba'achila. So when you eat a vegetable, it causes you to have more of a girui, a longing for food, and then when you eat the food, it causes greater satisfaction. You follow? So that is Rav Kook. Rav Kook is an introduction to what he's about to say. And then he's saying that a vegetable before a meal causes you to be hungrier for that meal. And then when you eat the meal, you will enjoy that meal more. You follow? Okay. So far, so good. Now he says something amazing. He says, really, a meal, ideally, let's say you were to go out and you were to have an amazing meal, whatever your favorite food is. Nachon? Now, there's always a debate that people like to think about every once in a while. Do I live to eat, or do I eat to live? Now, obviously, I want to say that we eat in order to live. You follow? I mean, I want to get up. I want to daven in the mornings. I want to spend more time learning Torah. I can't do that without a break, and therefore, I receive my sustenance from my food, and then that allows me to keep going. You follow? But then on the other hand, we all know there are moments where I'm sitting here, I don't know, 12:30, and lunch is at 1 o'clock, and I haven't eaten all morning, and I'm really very much looking forward to a meal, and that meal feels less like a means to an end, but much more like an end in itself. I'm really looking forward to that meal. You follow? So most of the time, for most of us, with all the best intentions in the world, even though we all know that our dream is to eat to live, we know that in our day-to-day lives, however much we might push ourselves, there's also a little bit of eat, of living to eat. Meaning I'm saving up for this meal. That when things go well, I'm going to treat myself. But what I'm enjoying is the meal. You follow? Because that's who we are. We're just not on that level.
It's important to enjoy what you eat.
Quite right.
The reason why we don't eat bad food.
Absolutely. You're quite right. And that's what we do every day of the year. Every day of the year, apart from one day of the year. There's one day of the year, Leil HaSeder, that meal, there is only one time in the year where we have a mitzvah d'oraita, that is to say, a biblical commandment to eat a particular food. Meaning on Shabbat, there is a mitzvah to have a meal, to enjoy yourself. Some people will eat this, some people will do that. Everybody will celebrate Shabbat in whatever they enjoy. But there's only once a year that we make a blessing. Asher Kedushan Mitzvotav. Hashem, you commanded us with your commands and commanded us tonight to eat matzah. So it's the only time that I have a mitzvah to eat a particular food at a particular time. And Leil HaSeder, sweet people, is the night on which I can overcome. I can really, on that night, I can eat to live. I can take that eating and give me the energy to get on with my Seder experience. You follow? The eating on Leil HaSeder is an emtsa'i. That is me to say it is a means to an end rather than an end in itself. Every time I eat. That's the end. Oh, I made it. I've had my meal. But here on this night, no. The Leil HaSeder, the meal that I eat, that matzah that I eat is a means to an end. I am fulfilling God's will. I am experiencing the Leil HaSeder story. I am not living to eat. On Leil HaSeder, I'm eating to live. You follow? Now let's read what he says. Rak az, this is on the third line. Beleil Shimurim, on this precious night. Leil Shimurim, the guarded night. That is guarded from the Mizikim, from all the Yetzer Hara, all the negativity that might pull me down at all other times. It's a night of purity, a night that I don't need to fight my evil inside of me like I do on other nights. It's a night of natural goodness. I would say Leil HaSeder is a night of heightened God consciousness. You follow? I just need to tap into it. And because it's a night of heightened God consciousness, naturally in the air, I just need to open myself to drink it in. But because of that, I'm able to reach something that I can't reach on any other night of the year. And that is eat to live. You follow? Now listen what he says. Habim mikol koach shel afrad min kol adam. Hamit parsamim rak min hamotar el ha'eder. Shavei arech shel bnei adam lahashpil agava v'hashpala lahakpia. Shegormim b'zeh lahasarat hamitznefet v'haramat ha'atara. רק בהתקדש חג קדוש איננו מוכשרים לציין חירותנו. Only on this day, you follow, מוכשרים לציין חירותנו, to to note our freedom, בתפיסת חיפוש אכילה של מי דגריר, שמרבה את העונג הבלתי מתואר כלל במטבע של הכרח, כי אם במטבע של מטרה בלתי משועבדת, שאיך שיהיה ערכה היא מוצאת את מקומה, מצטרפת אל הכלל הגדול. אוקיי. ובזה דווקא בזה התקשרו במטרה ונמצאים באגד אחד, אוכל והמשקה בטיבור, שבנשיאת ידיים לקודש השם יהיו לרצון יפארו את שולחן אשר לפני השם. He says, every other night, if I were to create hunger on any night other than Leil HaSeder, if I were to create my hunger, like to make myself feel hungrier by having a vegetable, I would be feeding my base sort of like desire to eat. You follow? But on Leil HaSeder, when I have this vegetable at the beginning, when I have this karpas at the beginning, and this karpas, as we saw from the Talmud, causes me to feel hungrier, when I trigger that on Leil HaSeder, it's not feeding into something physical of my live to eat, but it's feeding into something higher than that, which is eat to live. You follow? I have the potential on Leil HaSeder to take that excitement. I'm going to enjoy my meal more, but when I enjoy that matzah more, I will be having a spiritual experience in doing that. Any other night, you follow? I'll be so excited to eat the steak at this restaurant. So it'll just be, I'll be enjoying myself more. You follow? But on Leil HaSeder, this girui that causes the matzah to be more enjoyable, you follow? Huh?
It's actually a mitzvah.
Exactly. It's feeding into my mitzvah, as opposed to feeding into my desire for good food. You follow? And therefore, on this night, and only on this night, do I have the possibility of navigating this hunger to Avodat Hashem. You follow? So according to Rav Kook, the reason why I have Karpas is in order to cause hunger. You follow? And that hunger feeds into my possibility of eating my matzah with greater joy. You follow? Does that make sense to you? But it's only on this one night that I can open myself up to that possibility. Because on any other night, if I cause myself to be hungry, I'll just enjoy my meal more. That's it. I'll just be more excited to eat my steak or my burger or whatever it is I'm going to eat. I'm just more excited to enjoy. It'll just be a tastier portion of sushi. But on Leila Seder, that's not the case. The mitzvah of eating, the mitzvah of eating the matzah will be enhanced. You follow? I have the opportunity to enhance my mitzvah by coming through greater hunger. And that's why we have this vegetable at the beginning of the meal. You hear that? That's Rav Kook's understanding of why we do it. So people, I want to summarize what we've said. We started by looking at the Karpas, and we said it started, the Talmud mentions having this vegetable at the beginning of the meal. Ezra's banana. Rashi said the reason why we have it is in order that people should ask questions. In order that the kids should ask questions. We said that's a circular argument. In order that the kids should ask questions. And we looked at two interpretations. One interpretation of why we have it is because of this dipping. The dipping of the vegetable into the salt water echoes the dipping of Yosef's coat. Pasim, exactly. But I don't want to say it. So I don't tell that story, but I allude to that story because it's a hard story to tell in front of everybody.
Yeah, I like to say that story as the oldest to remind my siblings that if they don't behave themselves, they might end up in Egypt with their clothes.
Are you an oldest?
Yeah.
Oh, see, that's amazing. That's so nice of you. What a lovely sibling you are. That's brilliant. Excellent. So I think exactly for that, you've just strengthened the value of sort of remembering but not saying. And then Rav Kook, who's saying, no, what I'm doing is I'm generating hunger. By having it at the beginning, I'm generating hunger because tonight I've got this possibility of overcoming that my eating on Leil Seder is on a different level. Leil Shimurim, it's a night of protection from all those physical things that might draw me down in my eating experience every other day of the year. But take that eating experience, I'm going to be hungry for the mitzvah. And then when I eat the matzah, the mitzvah will be enhanced. I am eating to live, not living to eat. Okay, sweet, wonderful people, I want to bless us all. Yehi Ratzon for all of us, that we should be blessed to enjoy our karpas, whether it's a celery or a potato, or parsley, or a banana, or radish, whatever it is that you're having. You should be blessed to eat it. It should whet your appetite. It should whet your appetite so that the matzah that we eat at the end should be eaten with full excitement. Yishar koach to all of you. Yishar koach, yishar koach.